All right, geometry, we're talking 1.5 angle relationships now. So these are all the different relationships that two angles can have with one another. And some of them can be combined with others, some of them can't. So we'll start with vertical angles. These are two angles across from each other on intersecting lines. They are always congruent, okay? So an example of this would be something like this picture. If I have a line here and I have a line here, and we'll just name these angles 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the congruent angles, or the vertical angles, are the ones across from each other that kind of, when you put them together, they make an X. And they have to be making that X when you put them together, okay? So angle 1 is congruent to angle 3 because they're vertical angles. And then 2 and 4, mark those the same because angle 2 is congruent to angle 4 in this picture. Okay, and those are vertical angles. Vertical angles make an X. When you put their rays together, they make an X. Okay? So that's vertical angles. Now let's look at adjacent angles. Adjacent, the word adjacent means next to. Okay? So two angles that are next to each other and share a common side. Okay, so let's say I have an angle here and I have an angle here. So these are angle 1 and angle 2. So angle 1 and angle 2 are adjacent to each other because they share this line in the middle. Okay? And we talked about angle bisectors. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bisector, but it might be. Okay? But in this case, it's just this angle and this angle are adjacent because they're next to each other and they share that common side. Okay? So, going down the row here, let's look at complementary angles. So complementary angles are any two angles whose sum, okay, so remember that's adding together, whose sum is 90. Okay? So if I have something like this, and I know this is 90 degrees, okay, but I also have a line coming up from there, then it makes two angles. So this is angle 1 here, angle 2 here. Okay. Now, the whole angle, we don't know what the whole angle is, but we do know that since this is a square here, that whole thing is 90 degrees. So angle 1 plus angle 2 equals 90. Okay. Complementary angles. And then on the flip side, the next one is called supplementary. So the way you can kind of see the difference between these two, this one, complementary, comes before this one, supplementary, in the alphabet. Okay, so complementary is 90, supplementary is 180. Okay, so it would be something like this where we have, okay, I've got this line here, and then there's a line coming out that way, and this is angle 1, or sorry, let's do it the other way, angle 1 and angle 2. So 180 degrees is when it's a straight line, and since you can kind of see that's a straight line, that adds up to 180. Now, they don't have to be next to each other, okay? But, like, let's say this measure is 135 degrees, and this measure is 45 degrees. Those add up to get 180. So angle 1 plus angle 2 equal 180 degrees. Okay? And so, in that same breath, a linear pair is kind of the same as a supplementary angle, but they have to be next to each other. So two angles that are adjacent, so next to each other, and supplementary, they form a straight line. Okay, so it would be basically that same picture. Straight line, and you've got a line coming out from there. And so we have angle 1 here, angle 2 here. And so since they make this straight line, angle 1 plus angle 2 are equal to 180. So these kind of go together, but these don't have, supplementary doesn't have to be next to each other. Okay? Linear pair does. All right? So now that goes the same way for these. Okay? 1 and 2 make 90, but we might have two separate angles like this and this where they don't touch. They're not adjacent, but they're still the same thing. 1 and 2 add up to 90. That's possible too. Okay? So that's all the relationships: vertical angles, adjacent angles, complementary and supplementary, and then a linear pair, which goes right with supplementary. Okay? So, a few examples here. Check all the relationships between 1 and 2. So, we've got number 1. 1 and 2, they're across from each other, and they make that X shape. Okay? So if that's the case, that is vertical. We don't know if they're complementary, supplementary, linear, and they do not share a side. So, they do not share a side, so the only one that would work would be vertical. Okay, same thing here. They share a side, so that's one thing, adjacent. They're not vertical, so that's out. Complementary, well, if this here is 90, then this has to be 90 as well. And so complementary actually works for this. Okay, and if it's 90 degrees, there's no way it can be 180 degrees, so both of those are out. Okay. So how about number 3? 1 and 2 do share that side, so that's adjacent. They're not vertical. They don't make that X shape because they're right next to each other. Now, they do make a straight line. So they're a linear pair because they're next to each other and they're a straight line. And if it's a linear pair, it's automatically supplementary. Okay. Number 4, they do share a side. Okay, so if they share a side, it is adjacent. They're not vertical. You can't be adjacent and vertical. Those don't go together. Complementary, it kind of looks like those are a right angle, maybe a little bit, but if we don't have that X to confirm it, that's out. And it doesn't make a straight line, so those are out. So the only thing it is adjacent. Okay, so the last two, looking at these two, we have angle 2 here, angle 1 there. So what we have is actually these two angles make an X, so it would be vertical. Okay, so now looking at that, this one's a little tough to think about, but if you have these two tick marks here, that means these two are the same measure. And if they add up to 90, since this is a perpendicular situation, since this is 90, this has to be 92. And if they're the same, that means this is 45 and 45 because they have to add up to 90. Now, if this is 45 and this is 45, well, don't these two add up to 90 as well? That's a tough one to think about, but that is complementary in this case because 45 plus 45 is 90. They don't have to be right next to each other to be 90. Okay? And then the last one, number 6, we've got adjacent. No, that doesn't work. They're not next to each other. We have vertical. They are making that X shape. Okay? They are vertical. And then, are they complementary? Well, this is 90, and this is 90. So if they're 90 and 90, that's not complementary. Are they supplementary? Well, they're not complementary. Are they supplementary? Well, in this case, if this is 90, this has to be 90. And this has to be 90. So if this is 90 degrees, and this is 90 degrees, what's 90 plus 90? 180. So those are supplementary. Are they a linear pair, though? Are they next to each other? No. So they're not a linear pair. Okay. So we'll get some more practice with these relationships, but that's kind of the introduction to the relationships between angles. Okay. So if you want to get started on the homework, go ahead and do so. If not, we'll be getting that in class and talking about some of that stuff. All right. Peace.